Hi everyone, I'm Krishan from studycima.co.uk and I'm here to do a session for which is relevant for the November 2017 managerial case study. Okay, so if we talk about the company first, the company's name is ZX and it's a company which is specialized in um, manufacturing office furniture, high quality office furniture, and I won't be talking a lot about the company and about the case study because we have already posted a video on our Facebook page which gives an in-depth evaluation with regards to what happens within this organization, what happens within this industry, and what kind of problems are faced with ZX. Okay, so my objective of carrying out this session is to provide you with some tips to pass the exam successfully, and on top of that, I'll be talking about um, areas which are relevant to the managerial case study, E2 areas which are relevant to the management case study. So I'll start with telling you about tips which you can use to pass the exam without much of a hassle. So first things first, when you are starting the examination, bear in mind that you might already be aware that it's a 3-hour paper, and when reading the questions, you need to start picking up the requirements which are set by the examiner. I've seen so many students just writing what comes into their head without focusing on the requirement set by the examiner. So once you start reading the question itself, you need to pick the requirements, and for each and every requirement, you need to come up with a separate subheading. Why am I asking you to do this? I'm asking you to do this because if you do something like this, you would not requirements and you would the examiner won't. If you have read the whole under each subheading, you need to come up with a separate answer plan. So when you are coming up with answer plans, I'm recommending you to write it on the answer pad itself, not on the scratch pad, because the examiner cannot see what's written on the scratch pad when he's marking the paper, and on top of it, what's written or what's typed on the scratch pad cannot be copied and pasted on your answer pad. So when you are coming up with your answer plan, try to keep it as simple as possible. Don't take too much time, or don't try to elaborate too much, because elaboration should be done when you do the fully fledged answer. Worst case scenario, let's assume that you lack time, or you find out that you cannot fulfill some tasks which are given by the examiner. In that case, even if you have the answer plan in your answer pad, examiners might give you marks. So bear in mind, start the requirement, start with coming up with subheadings, and under each subheading, start writing your answer plans. And once you start writing your answer plans, when you go to the fully fledged answer, it's easier for you to score marks. And when you are coming up with the fully fledged answer, try to come up with paragraphs for each point which you are bringing out. And a paragraph should ideally have a minimum of 2 lines or 5 lines maximum. So if you can restrict it to something like 4 lines per point per paragraph, then it's easier for the examiner to identify and pick what you have written and provide you with marks. And it's best practice to leave 2 lines after each paragraph so that the examiner has space to give his marks, and it would make his life easier, and he would have a positive attitude towards marking your paper, which would definitely help you gain additional marks at the end of the day. And so that's how you should face the exam. And when facing the exam, time management should be looked at as well. That's very important, because I've seen so many students who are really good, who go face the exam, they cannot stick to the time. Because of that, they cannot fulfill all the requirements and they fail at the end of the day. So when managing time, what you need to have in your mind is, do not try to over elaborate. Just stick to the tasks and stick to the requirements which the examiner is requesting for, and write a direct answer. There's no point of writing theories. There's what you need to do is you need to keep it as practical as possible. Then let's talk about how the examiner provides marks. So he goes under how he provides you with marks, falls under 4 categories. You are already aware of it because probably you have done the operational case study. So the first one is technical, second one business, people, and leadership. These are the 4 main headings which an examiner uses to give marks. So in the operational case study, the examiner used 3 of these headings: technical, business, and people. And in the managerial case study, the leadership skills would be tested as well. So I'll take you through one by one. Technical aspects, the examiner is looking at the theoretical. Examiner is testing whether you understand the theoretical areas or the technical areas and whether you can apply them to the current scenario. For example, when you consider the technical or the theoretical areas, mainly P2 and F2 areas come into play, where you have to do sums, where you have to do use formulas and work your answers, and E2 aspects would come into the picture as well. When focusing on the technical areas, it is not recommended to replicate what you learn, replicate fully or create a carbon copy of what you learn at as part of your study system for the OTQs. There's no point of writing theories. What the examiner wants to see is whether you can use these theories and apply to the current case. Okay, moving on. Business skills. So when the examiner focuses on business skills, he wants to know whether you can apply the theories which you learned to the company which is considered. And if you cannot do that, you would not gain any marks for the business aspect. Then sorry about that. There were some technical difficulties. All right, then looking at the people aspect, in here we look at how the behavioral aspects are affected with regards to employees, what kind of recommendations you come up, and how these recommendations would affect the employees within an organization. And when you are providing your recommendations, take heed to keep them simple as possible so that it could be understood by people who come from non-financial backgrounds. So that's what the examiner wants to look at, and he would be looking at whether how your recommendations would affect the motivation levels, retention, how it would help manage conflicts, overcome resistance to change, and scenarios like that. And when focusing on the leadership skills, the examiner wants to know whether you can provide practical recommendations which best suits the company and the company's business context. So that's what the examiner is looking about. So if I go further, as I've told you before, the examiner doesn't want you to focus on theories that much. The examiner doesn't want you to say who came up with this theory, and he doesn't want you to go in depth with regards to these theories. I'll be talking about it in a few minutes time. Okay, and the most important thing when you face the exam is being confident. I've seen numerous students who do their homework properly, but when they are faced with a problem or a requirement where they have not studied or foreseen coming for the exam, they get stuck. Because of that, they press the panic button. And when they press the panic button, they can't complete the exam properly. So because of that, they fail. So the most important thing is being confident. So if you are being confident, even if you are faced with a requirement where you are clueless about what to write, you can leave it and move forward. I'm not asking you to leave any requirements. I'm asking you to answer all the questions, but in the worst case scenario, if you can't help it, move forward, forget about what you do not know. Focus on all the other requirements, because the examiner gives you 150 marks, and out of which you need to just take 80 marks. So focus on that. All right, so that's the first part of my presentation, and moving on to the second part, I'll be talking about areas which are E2 areas which are relevant to the managerial case study. So I'll give you an overview of the syllabus. So if I give you, if I talk about the syllabus, E2 syllabus, it's mainly broken down into 4 parts. The first part being how strategies, what kind of strategies are implemented within different companies. So the main focus is given to the rational strategy approach. So as students, there's no point of knowing all the steps of the rational strategy. Yes, you need to know it, but there's no point of replicating it in the exam, because you would never be asked to write an answer based on a fully fledged rational strategy. Rather than doing that, you need to know how different theories or models, business models, are applicable to each and every part of rational strategy. I'll give you an example. When looking at the corporate appraisal, a company is deemed to carry out an internal appraisal as well as an external appraisal. So I'll just focus on the external appraisal without taking much time. So when carrying out an external appraisal, the company is deemed to look at, or company can use 2 tools. One of the tools is Porter's 5 forces, which can be used to identify the industry dynamics, and companies can use the pestle analysis as well to identify the macro environmental aspects and how these factors affect companies. So there's no point of knowing Porter's 5 forces by heart, and there's no point of writing the whole theory in your exam. What you need to do is you need to know where Porter's 5 forces comes into play and how it could be used by the company for its benefit. And the same applies to all other theories. So the first chapter is mainly based on the rational strategy model and or rational approach to strategy formulation. Then other approaches come into play as well, other strategic approaches, for example, the emergent strategy, logical incrementalism, freewheeling opportunism, and muddling through approaches. So what you need to know is you need to know in depth why these strategies are used and their advantages as well as disadvantages presented by adopting these strategies. For example, the present business context is really dynamic. So in such a scenario, the unseen might give you, or the examiner might provide you with a scenario where the company has to totally change their planning or strategic planning model. So in such a scenario, you need to know out of all these methods, best needs of the company. So that's the first chapter. Then moving on to the second and third chapters, it's basically about how the human resource can be managed within an organization. So as part of these 2 chapters, you would come across how relationships are managed and how the human aspects within the organizations are managed. So you would have to bear in mind the theories with regards to motivation, retention, how teams are formulated, how conflicts can be identified and managed, and how change can be implemented within an organization. So all these things, as I told you before, there's no point of writing theory. It needs to be applied to the company, and your answers need to be practical at most. And the last chapter is all about change management and project management. This is very relevant to the current business context as well, because the current business environment, irrespective of the industry, it's ever changing and it's dynamic all the time. So in such a scenario, people or management accountants need to be able to manage change properly, overcome resistance, and on top of that, have the knowledge to manage different types of projects. So that's an overview of the syllabus areas. So throughout this presentation, I was constantly talking about not bringing out theories as per se, but applying it to the scenario which is given by the examiner. So I'll give you an example. Let's assume ZX is going through a restructuring, and because of that they have to make 100 employees redundant. So in that case, there's no point of writing all the theories. Recommended way of answering that kind of task is, first you need to plan out the redundancy process. So when planning out the redundancy process, what a management accountant needs to do is, first we need to select, or we need to find out all the performance appraisals of all the individuals or all the employees of the organization for the past 3 to 5 years, try to get the performance ratings and select the worst performing employees, the 100 worst performing employees. Just because we select the 100 worst performing employees, we do not get rid of them. What we do is, we carry out a one-to-one with them. The management needs to carry out a one-to-one interview with them, or a discussion with them, and try to negotiate with them and make them understand why they are made redundant. So in such a scenario, after carrying out such an exercise, the next step which the management can focus on is enabling these to be made redundant employees, giving them all the necessary opportunities to find jobs outside of the organization. So when doing something like that, what the organization can do is, the organization can provide paid leave, about 1 or 2 months of paid leave before they are made redundant, so that they have all the opportunity to go for interviews, as well as on top of that, the organization can pay compensation for these employees who are to be made redundant, or on top of that, the organization themselves can share the CVs of these employees with within the industry with their competitors, so that they will not be made redundant, and these redundancies are handled in an ethical manner. So there's no there's no point of talking about theories. Make it you need to come up with answers which are practical and which are relevant to the organization. So in the operational case study, you focused more on the technical aspects. Now you take a step further. You try to be practical as much as possible. You try to be humane as much as possible. You score marks for people aspects. Then you try to make it relevant or practical. So getting marks for the leadership aspects as well. So that sums up my session. And if you have any doubts about this session, or if you need to clarify any doubts, you can post it in the comment section. And I'm wishing you all the very best for the upcoming exam, and we are there to help you out if you have any issues. Thank you very much. This is Krishan signing out.